Let's kick it off with K. Since you're the representative from the World Economic Forum. So K, you've been working on trust in AI for 6 years, which a pretty long time for this particular debate. How has the debate changed over the last 6 years? And why don't you also lay out what the World Economic Forum has just published on that so we can have a little starting point. So kick it off, Kay.
Sure. So, I started my career in thinking about ethics and trust in AI in 2014. And at that stage, there was just DeepMind and with an ethics advisory panel and the company that I worked for at that time. I think then we went through more talking about it, certainly in Europe and the States, as we spun up the work that the IEEE has been doing on ethically aligned design. And then in 2015, some of us went to Asilomar and set up the first principles in this area. So from there, we have, I think, just last year and this year, begun to see very much more understanding about some of the problems in the creation of AI and actually companies willing to tackle those problems. And also countries. So one of the pieces of work that I do at the forum is work on technology governance. And I have countries coming to me saying, we want to do something, but we don't know what we want to do. So can we work with you to create that? So Nick, you asked me about what we're doing. I just want to give you a couple of examples of things that were released this week at Davos, and then a couple of examples of some of the other work that's in train. We actually have 10 governance projects ongoing at the moment out of our offices in San Francisco, India, China, and Japan. And we have affiliated offices, 7 of those around the world. We expect to have 20 affiliated offices, all working on tech governance, some of them AI, by the end of 2020. So it's very much a focus of the work that we're doing at the forum. So the 2 things that we've released this week, one is a toolkit for boards of directors to learn about AI and what their oversight responsibilities are in relation to companies that are beginning to use AI. When we did a landscape review of and a survey of boards of directors, a lot of them didn't even know what AI was. So this is a very elementary starting point, but at least it's a starting point. And Anna Roland, who is my fellow from BBVA, actually worked and led that project. The other project is a project that we were doing led by Singapore, but everything that we do, we scale internationally. And that is a framework that companies can use to test whether they are ethically using or responsibly or trustworthily, whichever word you use, using artificial intelligence within their companies. And the Singaporean government is actually going to go on and set up a certification to go with that framework and assessment material. Very quickly, 2 other things. We're working with the United Kingdom government. They will adopt the work that we've been doing on procurement of artificial intelligence by a government. And so this is guidelines and a workbook for government procurement officers to actually use when they're thinking about buying or creating AI in-house. So that has already been tested in 3 other countries. And again, the idea is to scale it. Finally, there is one area that we do think there should be regulation. We agree with Brad Smith on this, and that is facial recognition. And at the moment, we're working with France to really sort of dig deep into what that might look like. So more on that, certainly at the next Davos, but probably earlier than that too.
Oh, ideally in the next 5 minutes we'll get into that too. Well, thank you for that wonderful introduction to your work. I was thinking when you said you were helping people define AI that When somebody hasn't done any work in AI, they don't know what AI is, and then they understand it. But when they've done tons of work in AI, they no longer know what AI is, as our definition continues to get diluted. Daniela, why does this matter? Why does trustworthy AI matter?
Well, in order to answer this question, we have to go back to what is AI and how it works. And let me start by saying that artificial intelligence, in other words, the science and engineering of creating machines with human-like characteristics in how they see the world, how they interact, how they play games, even how they learn, remains aspirational. We do not have an AI solution. But we have a lot of algorithms that take advantage of a lot of data, and from this data they make predictions and they find patterns much better than we humans can, much faster than we can. And the thing is that many of these algorithms, some of them are classified as deep learning, others are classified as other types of supervised learning, but many of these algorithms perform in a way that seems to be doing the right thing, but we have no idea how these algorithms reach the decisions that they reach. We get empirical and statistical support, but we know that the algorithms are as good as the data that is used to train them, but what if the data is incomplete? What if the data has biases? So there are a lot of pitfalls with using the techniques. So trustworthy means that if we're going to ask machines to support us in decision making, we really have to gain some trust. We really have to ensure that we have some measures that ensure consumer confidence. And that means understanding how the machine made the decision, why the machine made the decision, understanding whether the decision is fair, it's broadly applicable, whether the data used to train the machine is good data, whether there is bias in the data. All of these are challenges in today's algorithms, and we have to put in provisions to ensure that we have good answers along all these attributes.
Bowen, are these surmountable challenges? Because, I mean, I don't even know exactly why I do anything. I don't know exactly why I called on you right now. I mean, the mysteries of how the human mind works are substantial as well. Will we be able to solve the mysteries of how AI makes decisions? I saw you nodding while Daniela was talking, so I sense that you agree.
I agree, but I want to add something more on top of what Daniel said, why we need to discuss about the trustworthy AI at another dimension. So if you look back, how AI is comprehended by the public is through some promotions from companies in the stage of human-machine competition, ranging from early days, Deep Blue, Watson, that's from IBM, who I used to work with, to DeepMind's AlphaGo. So on the one hand, this is a great showcase of demonstrating AI's progresses. But on the other hand, this sometimes ignites some worries about, wow, this works so better than what I can do. Will this threaten my job in the future at some point? So I think that's another reason, we have seen many disruptive technologies in the IT industry for the past decades. But AI, I think, is the most disruptive one in the sense that this is for the first time that the general public feel like AI can do their jobs. So the reason why we have this discussion about trustworthy AI is that I think it's very, very important to let people know some of the worries are not necessary, right? We do AI research 50 years ago, 60 years ago, starting by let AI imitating people. But in the long run, AI is here to serve people. Okay, so that's one point I want to make, adding on top of what Daniela said.
What do we not have to worry about with AI? What do we worry about that we should not worry about?
Well, okay. So that would take a few minutes. Okay. So
that's why we're here.
So yeah. I just want to say, AI is not going to take over the world, right. And AI is not going to take down the world. In a nutshell.
Good way to put it. Okay. So let me get back to your questions, right? So according to my observations, people are worried about AI coming from three perspectives. A, they worry about AI because they do not understand fully how AI works.
Sure.
Okay. Secondly, they see some AI systems so powerful at the company level or at the individual level. They start worry about we may fall behind, I may fall behind, my company may fall behind. Then the third worry is that AI is so powerful, and we have seen many AI systems being deployed for general public's life and administration, and so on and so forth. So where's the regulation? So that the main three cause of this war is coming from. The reason why I say we don't need to worry about this too much, simply put, for AI, how AI works, need to be educated. Daniel and I worked in AI research. We know that today's AI pretty much depending on lots of labeled data, right? So the AI system is not as smart as we think. Secondly, AI today is at still at the early stage. If I imagine AI as an ocean, I think where we are now as humankind is just working on the beach. There's tremendous amount of work for us to be done. How to learn faster, how to learn more effectively, how to do unsupervised learning, and so on and so forth. How to represent knowledges. So don't worry about falling behind too much. What we need, on the other hand, is open collaborations to advance the research together as a community with open dialogue, with open communications. So AI is not a sprint, it's a marathon. So that's my second answer to the second worries. The third one, the regulation one, is a very interesting topic. Professor Xue and I participated in some regulation discussion in China. So our conclusion is that regulation for AI should be principle-based and should be agile. Because AI is still evolving, we need a regulation. I agree to that. But on the other hand, don't feel overwhelmed that our regulation not keeping up with technologies. This is not the first time we've seen this. Let me give you one example. In 1908, Ford made the first Model T available, transforming the entire transportation industry. But only after 60 years did the regulation on seatbelt come out. If I remember correctly, the first city requires taxi passenger seatbelt, back it up. It's in New York City in 1980s. So the regulation of seatbelt came like 70 years after the invention. But this did not prevent people enjoying and benefiting from the revolutionary.
Doesn't this analogy make the opposite point? Because hundreds of thousands of people died. I mean, I wish we'd had seatbelt regulations in 1915. So shouldn't we make the argument that the seatbelt analogy means that we should jump out? Xue, you want to jump in here?
Well, I think that this really shows the human society. I mean, we are a learning society. So I think probably prior to that, we don't know what's the best way. So we think that that's a kind of a consequence that we have to pay. But I think that at the same time, indeed, as you said, and because of the accidents and so on, people are actually saying, what are the ways we can actually save people's life? For example, in terms of speed limit, right? So people may say, okay, maybe we should put a limit on how fast you can drive. But at the same time, you find that's hard to regulate, because I mean it's hard to monitor how people, how fast people drive, and so I think then there are many different ways, and then so there is one of this kind of innovation that comes up, and people find that in terms of cost-benefit analysis, that's probably one of the best ways to save people's life.
So my point is that in real mirror, you are right. So that's why we call for the agile governance, which means we learn along the way. We learn something, we quickly adapt to it. But my point here is that without this innovation, without this deploying car on our roads, we won't learn this. There's no way you can sit in here and say, oh, I know that this car, next time is seatbelt. You have to deploy it and test it, and we learn from that. Of course, I wish we could learn this in a much shorter time than 60 years. You're right.
All right, well, let me ask you a question. Let me open it to anybody on the panel, because it's the thing I most want to learn in this conversation, which is the United States has a different way of looking at the trade-offs in AI and how much we should regulate now and how much we should let it go ahead and regulate the seatbelts after 50 years. Europe has a view and China has a view. Explain how the conversations are different in China versus the United States. All of you have had conversations in both countries, so maybe, I don't know, Kay, do you want to start? Professor Xue, you want to start?
Yes, I can start. I think that, and I'm going to defer for China to others. I'll do Europe and the United States. I think that the way in which the governance is happening in the United States is troubling, simply because the possibility of a tech clash, where as consumers find out that they are the product more and more, as we use AI more and more in our homes, as our children begin to use AI, and most people really care about their children and how their children's data is being processed, for example, those sort of things will lead to customers beginning to say, okay, so what are our rights here? We at the forum have been talking about governance rather than regulation. I think there are different stages that it's important for companies to look at. But if companies do nothing in this climate, then I think that we will begin to find that all the promises that we have of AI will begin to be lost. So now is the moment for, now is our future. What we shape now is what we will have for the future.
So do you feel like the tech clash leads to a risk that there's going to be overregulation, too much fear of AI, and the West will be unable to take advantage of this wonderful technology?
Yes, I think there is a definite concern about that. I mean, in Europe, they are beginning to try to address that. Whether it will impede innovation in Europe, we obviously have to wait and see. But maybe what we're looking for is a balance between the two.
Okay.
I would just add to that in the United States we want to make sure that the system is safe at a very high standard, very high level before we deploy it. And so, for instance, we can look at one particular sector, transportation, and self-driving cars. And there is a lot of resistance to deploying self-driving car technology because it is not proven. It is not yet safe. At the same time, if we don't experiment, if we don't deploy, then how can we get it to the point where it's fully debugged? And so we're just beginning to create special areas where autonomous driving can be tested. But even so, deployments require a lot of safety standards like the safety driver and other things. So I think that in the United States we're very cautious with respect to deployment. And we embrace the principle that if we're going to rely on a machine, we really want to make sure that machine is safe, it's foolproof.
Bowen, you've spent many, many years in the United States, many years in China. What's the difference in the way people talk about these issues?
Well, I think despite of the difference in culture, on trustworthy AI, I think I saw more consensus between China, US, even Europe. So for example, everybody I talked to agreed that the AI need to be fair, right? So there's a fairness. So there's also accountability. There's also a value alignment. I think is very important. Let me explain what I mean by value alignment. I think the value of an AI-enabled product or services need to be assessed by not only the developers of the AI technologies, scientists, but also the end users of this technology, but also the people around this end user of these technologies. They need to be aligned on the value. So everybody I talk to looks like agreed on these three dimensions at least, right? Value alignment, fairness, and accountability. But me as a technologist, I believe trustworthy AI should also include other dimensions. For example, robustness, right? How can I trust a technology if it works in the lab but it fails after deployment? The second thing here is repeatability, right? So I can use this AI technology really well, but I tried on you, failed on you. So that's not trustworthy AI. The third one is explainability. So these three other dimensions are very challenging today for us. So in my opinion, trustworthy AI is not only a slogan, it's not only a technology social value, it's also grand technical challenges. So that's why I think trustworthy AI is a good thing to unify scientists like Daniela, industry like me, and policymakers all working together to embrace these principles.
All right, let's get to a more specific level. Let's go back to face recognition and let's talk about how we think about the risks, how we think about the trade-offs, and what the government is actually doing. So, Professor, do you want to start with, as best you can explain it, you advise the Chinese government their position on appropriate and not appropriate applications of face recognition technology?
Well, I think first of all, I think let's get to the similarities between different countries in terms of the governance of AI. Actually, I chair the governance committee on sort of on AI in China, and Bowen is also a member, and so we actually in last year we worked hard to try to develop a sort of guiding principles for companies and so on. And we studied different countries' principles, and we actually found actually there's quite a lot of much more similarities than differences. So we came up with 8 principles actually very much in line with many, what you find say from US, from Japan, from Europe, and so on. So I think on the principle, I think we all share a lot of those basic principles. I think let's move on to the second kind of thing, which is application. I think at this stage, as Bowen said, we are still on the shore of the big application sea. So of course here I think different countries really have very different social and economic sort of needs, and here I think then you see the difference. But in similar areas, for example, in terms of autonomous driving, again in China it's also very cautious about where you can actually start to do experiment. I think there are some so-called AI experimental zones in different cities, and then they are to really try to limit that. So I think that's very much similar. I think in terms of facial recognition, I think this is something that's been talked a lot about in other countries. I think that one would have to come to China to really to see why this technology is needed and being used. For example, I think now currently is the Chinese New Year, the season. For this season, we're talking about hundreds of millions of people, traveling in around countries. So at a place like a train station, at the airport and so on, you have massive volume of people are going through, the gates and so on. So usually that takes a long time. For example, years ago, I think my friend, who were traveling by train, they would have to take 3 or 4 hours, to try to get to the airport to make sure that they have enough time to go through the checking point. For going to the train station, they could even spend half a day ahead of the time to make sure that they can go through the volume. So I think there you have a huge social need to go through those checks very fast. So here I think that's where facial recognition technology is really handy, and so that's what you see the wide application of.
Kay, do you agree? Do you think next year in Davos, when we get off the bus and register, we should just scan our faces and forget about these things right here?
I don't know the answer to that. What I do know is that the project that we're doing with the government of France is actually looking at the very same things that you are looking at, whether it's appropriate to use facial recognition at train stations and airports. And the underpinning piece of work that is being done is, what is the trade-off between security and safety for the state and we as citizens having our civil liberties. Mm-hmm. And so when we've done that piece of work, we're about halfway through now, then we'll move on to whether we use facial recognition at Davos next year.
So it's possible that Davos will have face recognition next year.
I don't know. I think we will wait and see.
All right, Daniela, let's talk about how you could have trustworthy facial recognition, right? So facial recognition obviously makes things go much faster. It's very efficient. I love being able to open my phone with my face. It's just a delight. But obviously there are different errors you could make. You could identify somebody as, you could miss somebody. You could have a false negative. You could have a false positive, or I could be going through the train station. It could say I'm a criminal. I get stopped. I get stuck. I can't go where I need to go during Chinese New Year. How do you design face recognition software so that you can have explainability for those two kinds of errors?
Well, another big challenge with face recognition is bias, right? Because the quality of your face recognition algorithm really depends on the data used to train it. And interestingly, we have made significant advances with respect to bias, with respect to dealing with bias. And we now have techniques that are able to look at a data set, whether it's for face recognition or any other problem, and we're able to specify some criteria, and from that criteria we can tell whether there is bias in the data, and we can tell whether the data needs to be enriched in other dimensions. And so with respect to bias, we are making good progress technologically. Now, with respect to the privacy aspect of face recognition, this is a much bigger, much more challenging question. And there are technological solutions that we are pursuing. There is a new brand of algorithms that ensure differential privacy, that ensure that if you give your data to a system, then you cannot be identified. Your private aspects of the data and your identity cannot be pulled out. However, face recognition used in a setting like Davos is a whole different beast, right? So how do you make sure that my face does not get recognized as you? And this is a really challenging question, because with the advancement of deep fakes, it is so easy to turn my face into your face. It is so easy to tamper with programs that can do that. And technologically, we almost have an arms race, right? So we come up with some solutions for catching deep fakes, and those solutions, then the deep fakes get more complex, and the cycle continues. I personally believe that the only way to address that is to rethink how we check the fakes, and to create, in some sense, an end-to-end authentication process that starts with the pixels that capture the image in the camera, and then at every stage of data transfer from the camera to wherever the data is used, we actually have authentication and certification. We don't have these technologies in place yet, but we have beginnings of some ideas for addressing them.
I would like it if my face were recognized as Bowen's, because I think you probably get invited to some pretty cool Chinese government parties that I'd like to get into that I'm not welcome at. But we'll see about that next year. Let's talk about bias for a second. I'll direct it at either of you. So there's a really interesting question about bias and face recognition, which is the data is trained on the data that exists. In the US, it tends to be better at recognizing white people's faces than black people's faces. So I describe it that way, that sounds terrible, right? That's completely unjust, and a group that is often disadvantaged by the law is disadvantaged yet again. But if I describe it as it's 99.95% accurate on white people and 99.92% accurate on black people, then it sounds a little bit different. How do you think about racial bias in face recognition? Let's talk about it in the US and in China.
We have solutions to debias the facial recognition algorithms. So we have metrics that look at the data set used to train the face recognition software, and we can capture precisely those failure points that you're describing. And we can then enhance the data, or we can remove some of the data. We can make adjustments so that we have equal response for all races.
How is that issue thought about in China?
So, I find it fascinating people talking about the face recognition, but I just want to remind people that the AI's application is way beyond perception. Okay, but before I go, give you another example how AI is being used in day-to-day life. I just want to respond to what you said here. That I think for face recognition, in my opinion, would be transparent. You should let people know you are being captured. Your face could be recognized, right? I think we should avoid that with other people's, notification, their face is being captured and recognized. I think that's something we should try to avoid. On the other hand, I read some from the news that Chinese policies forces are using face recognition to find kidnapped kids who are kidnapped like 18 years ago. It's amazing with the AI's technology that AI still can recognize this now adult, matching with the childhood pictures, identify who actually came from. So this is a good use of face recognition as an example. But I do want to, because I don't want to leave this conversation only on face recognition, because as we know, AI including perception, cognition, decision making, and so on and so forth. So let me give you one example we have been doing. Because I'm from industry, I deploy AI technologies to help business to be more effective. So this is from day-to-day life example. So there's a pop meat store in Guangdong province, a very small one, mom and daughter store, called the Anti-Chain. So their goal is that to offer fresh meat in the marketplace. So this is of course, it's great, goal, right? Because as customers, we all want to buy fresh meat, not all night meat. But for the people to run this store, they need to make lots of decisions on every day, right? How much meat should I import? And if I did not sell them fast enough, how much should I discount? And when start the web I discount, and so on and so forth. So those kind of decisions are very hard for a mom and daughter store to make on a regular basis. So we actually reach out to them. My AI team combined with JD's supply chain team, we design an automatic system to help them to make decisions at every single point. We're using the online information, so the neighborhood data information, as well as traffic, as well as weather information, to help them predict how fast your meat can be sold. If not, what should be the pricing strategy using reinforcement learning. So as a result, 2 years after deploy our systems, I think this store it's opened up from Guangdong, very south part of China, across the Changjiang River, go to the North China now. So their annual sales, I think, is more than 60 million RMB per year. So what's behind this is a repeatable AI system that can be used for every store. So I always tell my team, I think this is a good example of how we apply AI and also extend the vision of AI is that AI can not only help people on perception-wise, but it can also help people make better decisions.
So this leads back to something you said earlier when you were listing the fears that people have about AI. One of the fears is, if I don't master AI, I will fall behind. And this is a really good example of where if you do master AI, you will get ahead. So shouldn't the converse also be true? That if you don't master AI, you won't be able to sell your meat in China?
Very, very good point. So let me go further on this. So when this is done, I help Anti-Chain grow their business. The next question I'm asking myself here is that, look, there are millions of stores like this, like Anti-Chain. Chain is a popular Chinese last name. I help the Anti-Chain, but there will be Anti-Li, Anti-Zhang. Who's going to help them? Right? I don't want them to fall behind either. Yeah. So the solution we did here is that we built an AI platform called the New Hub. We provide all these API capabilities we developed. We make it open accessible to any developers. So our solution here is that I cannot help every single store in China, but I help there will be ecosystem, there will be developers, there will be startups, there will be academics. They're going to work with us to build solutions for other stores, to again to leverage the playground, and also ultimately help the customers have better, experiences.
Okay, that makes sense. All right, we have 15 minutes left, so let's move to audience Q&A. If you have a question formulated by AI, you get the advantage. Christine, go first.
Great. Christina Ladner, Finance Innovation Tech Pioneer with
Okay.
Oh, yes.
Christina Lam. This is not on? Is on?
It's good.
Okay.
Yes.
Christina Lamp-Jonnerud. I'm with Cadenza Innovation, a tech pioneer with World Economic Forum. My question is not necessarily on facial recognition, but really the concern of having multiple data streams tied to your personality. And facial is just one of them. How do you see this as an ultimate opportunity or threat for privacy and decision making, as well as influencing you as a human being into decision making? Thank you.
So, certainly one of the things that I was listening to the conversation and thinking about children. So we have this project that we're doing with UNICEF to think about the use of facial recognition, for example, with children, and whether actually affect recognition with children is a better thing than facial recognition, because with facial recognition you're you're naming them, you're using their privacy, you're using their data, and how does that work? Whereas with affect recognition, you might then simply be having their toy recognize that they're sleepy or that they need something or those sort of things. So as we bring AI into the marketplace where children are concerned, I think we have to just be particularly careful with some of these applications and what it means to children's privacy as they grow up, and what it means in the stories that are being told to them by their toys.
I would love to add that, of course, we live in a world where now everyone can learn anything about you, and privacy is an important concern. There are many ways to think about this problem. I just want to give you some technological solutions. Technology is not the ultimate answer, but the research community understands this is a serious problem, and we are thinking about technological solutions. One particularly promising solution that will help with exactly the issue you bring up is something called homomorphic encryption. It's the idea that in the future we will be able to compute on encrypted data without decrypting the data. Yeah. And if that is the case, then imagine a future where all of us can give our data for the greater good, so that we can learn how to engineer better medicines that are targeted to individuals, for example, how to engineer other services that are targeted to you, but without having to decode the data, without the fear that what you contribute for the greater good can at some point be used against you. And this is one example of how technology can help solve a problem that, frankly, technology has generated.
In the second row, please.
So thanks very much. My name is Ian Opperman. I'm the Chief Data Scientist for the New South Wales Government in Australia, but also a Vice President of the Australian Computer Society. A bit of context. We've been doing a lot of work in New South Wales about developing a strategy, a policy, and appropriate use. We have borrowed heavily from the UK and also from the World Economic Forum. We've also been trying to address the concern of privacy-preserving data sharing. The last 3 years, we've been working with the standards world, ISO and IEC and JTC1, not so much with IEEE. And we'll be talking about that later in this summit. As we've been introducing strategies, policies, and how-to guides for AI, we've really hit this issue of trust. And one of the questions that we've been looking at is the relative focus of data. We've talked about data here. Algorithmic issues, bias being one of them, and appropriate use. And I'd really appreciate your perspective on data, algorithm versus appropriate use.
All right, big question. Who wants to take it?
Yeah, let me first have a crack on the data issue. I think actually you're absolutely right. I think those are the critical issues in terms of generating sort of in a way the wide application of AI technology. I think fundamentally I think data governance is a critical, I would say, institutional infrastructure for AI application. I think that now I think GDPR has I think set one example. I think there are many other countries are working on that. I think China now has a regulation that's that's being drafted and now being circulated to get the feedback from the general public. So I think that's I think I see as the bedrock for any sort of further application of AI. So I think totally agree. I think that's the part. I think I agree. I think algorithm, I think, gets deferred to those two.
I'd love to jump in and
say
something about algorithms. Algorithms will make mistakes, and but it's interesting because the mistakes that the algorithms make are maybe different than the mistakes that humans make. So I like to advocate the use of machine learning not as the automated decision-making tool, but as an advisory tool that will help the human make a better decision. And I can give you a very quick example from a study in healthcare that was done recently in the Boston area, where machines and doctors were asked to classify radiology scans as cancer or not cancer. So the machine error was 7.5%, as compared to the doctor error at 3.5%. But when they worked together, when the machine worked as an advisory to the doctor, the error went down by 80% to 0.5%. And so this is where we really see the power of the machine to see patterns, to see things in huge oceans of data that are difficult for people to see, but without really understanding what it is that the machines are seeing, it's difficult to have an actionable decision from the machine. That's why it's better to pass on the results to the human. In the meantime, the research community is also aiming to improve our understanding of algorithms and the tools we have to classify and characterize what the algorithm is doing, to guarantee what the results mean.
Hi, I'm Pernilla Tranberg. So AI is kind of a disruption of the human being, from human intelligence to artificial intelligence. Where are your red lines? And I don't want to hear the autonomous weapon example. Where should we not apply AI? And in that, how do we actually keep human control? Because it is kind of more clever than we are, right? So should there always be a human decision at the end, or should we let some of it just go?
All right, red lines.
First of all, I think that's a fascinating question, and I also totally agree that we should have some red lines. Because I think in the past, people say, okay, research, there's no, there shouldn't be any barrier in terms of our research where that's going. But I think AI is different. I think given the kind of general public's concern and so on, I would argue for some red lines for not really, where we shouldn't go. But of course, where that line should be drawn, I think that we should really have a sort of public, discussion, public debate about where that should be. I mean, it's sort of ethical, decision, but I think that should not be just by experts, should not just be by one single country, but I think should really be the general public to see where people are concerned, and also particularly what are the potential risks that might introduce. That there are some risks that once you are introduced, it's you can't really go back. So I think that's where I think indeed we need to have a more sort of broader discussion on those issues.
What are the specifics? So people do debate it with autonomous weapons. People do debate it with facial recognition technology. Where else should we debate it?
Just go back to the procurement project that I was talking to you about. That was a government, the UK represented here, in fact, the UK sort of saying, okay, so where are our red lines around artificial intelligence and the use of it within government? And now we will, having established those, we will work out guidelines so that we buy only those AI solutions that fit into our red lines. So I don't think it's just about particular technologies. You can deal with it in a more broader sweep. So it's governments making their own decisions as well.
Okay, so the way I think about it is that AI is a tool, and it's a tool to support people. But as such, we really have to understand what the capabilities and the trust of these tools should be. And I believe that there are certain attributes that cut across all uses of AI that should be enforced. So for instance, explainability, accountability, fairness, privacy, these are general attributes. And then if you look at applying techniques in the healthcare sector or transportation sector or security sector, there are different questions that these attributes amount to. Maybe in finance, why didn't I get a loan? Or in autonomous vehicles, why the accident happened? So to ensure consumer confidence, any use of an AI tool, and I mean a tool, I don't mean an agent that will make your decision. Any use of an AI tool should be given almost like a driver's test to ensure that these attributes are dealt with correctly.
All right, well, my red line is about 5 minutes because everybody has to get to lunch. So let's do 2 more questions right here in the front, and then we'll go to the back.
My name is Anil Chaudhary. I lead the Digital Bangladesh Transformation Agenda from the government, from the cabinet and the Prime Minister's office in Bangladesh. AI is new to us. I mean, we've been doing digital transformation within the government for the last 12 years and have created a massive shift for improving public service delivery. I draw your attention to this report from CGAP, not about AI, but it's indicative. It's about improving public service delivery versus privacy. And the report had a Western component, so US and Europe component, and a Eastern, sort of South Asia and Africa component. So the number one concern in the Western component was privacy. And the number one concern in the southern part of the world was improvement of public service delivery. Privacy was not of any concern. So as we deal with AI, I think similar things will actually come up. So if you have a public debate, the public will, at least in low-income countries, will say, I want public service to be improved. Loss of control, loss of privacy, those are secondary concerns. So we've launched an AI strategy for the next 5 years in Bangladesh. And we are actually already getting into these debates. We're looking at child biometric to improve child marriages, because birth registration can be done multiple times in Bangladesh because there is the biometric associated with the registration. And we're trying to bring in child biometric associated with that. And all these AI governance issues are coming up. So again, looking from the context of low-income countries where technology is not completely prevalent, we're struggling with technology introduction in many different areas. And then Kay mentioned the public procurement for AI as well. So these are things I think that will help us. But again, if you could talk from the perspective of low-income countries and how AI should really be looked at. The red lines, I don't think it's use case specific. Every use case may have a red line. It's not just autonomous vehicle, it's not just autonomous weapons, it's actually every use case there may be a red line. But how do we look at this, those red lines, and how do we actually implement AI governance? Who should really be involved in the AI governance, from the government, from the private sector, from the development partners, and so on and so forth?
So obviously what I would say first is, the projects that we do at the forum are always multi-stakeholder. So always we have governments, businesses, civil society and academics involved in our projects. And I think that that's the conversation that you need to be having. The only caveat that I would say about, romping ahead with AI to solve problems, and of course we need to do that, is just to be sure that you don't give away things like privacy and then it comes back to bite you because you've gone ahead. So there is a juggling there, and I know that you're saying people would trade privacy, but maybe when some of these solutions are found, they'll realize, as we did in Europe and America, that actually we didn't want to trade our privacy quite as much as we thought we might.
All right, in the back, and also please trade your privacy and say who you are.
So André Pietri, we are building the European version of DARPA, but with a civilian focus. And one quick question. The one information is we don't believe at all that we can mix these two, so we need to find, for example, face recognition systems which are distributed. As soon as you have a centralized database, it will end badly. At least that is how, because we consider that values and technologies are increasingly linked. And that's my question, so we are launching a grand challenge on that. Can we do face recognition without a centralized system? The question to you is, when I listen to trust in AI, do you really believe it's in the technology that we need to trust? It's like with capitalism, we don't trust a company, but we trust a system which is supposed to distribute value. We don't trust a government, but we trust a system with checks and balances. Can we disconnect the trust part with a system in which AI is applied? Can there be rule by an AI charter or a rule from an AI charter, to take a famous quote that is linked to the Chinese system? And maybe a question to you, Daniela, in particular.
Well, so I believe you need both. I believe that on the technology side, the tools that we have today are just not that good, and we really need to do better. We need to try as hard as we can to enhance the tools that we have. But that's not sufficient because the deployment of technology does require a social contract, does require a set of rules, a set of guidelines for how to use the technology and how to use it in a way that benefits society. So I frankly believe that it's very important to enhance the conversations that are happening at the forum where policymakers and technologists and business leaders come together, because policymakers often don't understand what technology can and cannot do. And technologists are really so in love with the technology that they do, they just want to make it more and more capable. And then business leaders want to make a lot of money. So it's important to have all three parties together in the conversation to define what is possible. And if you understand the scope of technology, then the rules and the regulations could be adjusted to support what the technology is able to do now, but also to influence the development of technology in particular directions.
So I just want to add that, I see what you mean, but me as a technologist, I also believe every problem, if you want to address them, you need to think about the technology itself. For example, you mentioned this face recognition without a centralized database. Itself is a technical challenge. So if we can make progresses on federal learning or the technologies, we make that happen. So same thing for the trust part. So we don't have to trust each company, but we can invent technologies to enforce transparencies, to kind of help design the system. Your system idea makes a lot of sense, but it won't happen until we have technology support it.
All right, well, the World Economic Forum, I need them to trust me that I'm going to end these panels on time. So that's a wrap. Thank you very much. Fantastic conversation, all kinds of great perspectives.
Thank you.
Thank you, awesome panelists.
Thank you. Really great discussion.